and just hold space for that. Thank you for coming. So we made this work. We joined with CARE New Jersey to present this because obviously, as we all know, this is a really hard time for everyone. We are trying to process and mourn what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine all over, while also now having to go through our own struggles as Palestinians or people that support Palestine in workplaces and schools that are very anti-Palestine, unfortunately. So today, joining us from CARE New Jersey is Aya Zaki. Aya is part of the growing legal team at CARE New Jersey, where she focuses on civil rights casework and legal initiatives, including representing clients and affected communities in advocacy and litigation. She also engages elected officials and other key stakeholders to advance the organization's overall mission and address the concerns of clients and the New Jersey Muslim community at large. Prior to joining CARE, Aya served on the Deportation Defense Initiative team at the American Friends and Service Committee. She represented clients in removal proceedings, most of whom were held in immigration detention facilities. She also represented non-citizens in removal proceedings and clients detained in Guantanamo Bay at the City University of New York Law Clinic. Aya obtained her Juris Doctor degree from SUNY Law and her Bachelor's of Arts from Columbia. Today, Aya is going to give us a presentation on Know Your Rights. I've printed out questions that everyone submitted on the Google Doc, so I will be addressing these. During the presentation, if you have any clarifying questions, so something Aya specifically said, feel free to raise your hand and ask, but any other questions that are more general or open for discussion, we'd like to keep it to the end so that we can have a productive workshop and because your question may be addressed during the workshop. So without further ado, thank you, Aya, for joining us.
So everyone, thanks for coming in on a weekday for this. I think it's really important and I hope that you can gain perspective after this workshop. So I'm here to kind of give you an overview of what your rights are in various contexts and how to teach you how to advocate for Palestine in a safe way. So we'll cover advocating for Palestine in the employment context. We'll cover it in the university context and even at a high school, elementary school, middle school context. Unfortunately, as well as the law enforcement context. Unfortunately, we've seen cases in the past month or so that arise from all of these categories that I just mentioned, and they're not getting, they're on the rise. There's a surge that started October 8th onwards, and kind of, if you look around the room, there's probably one family member of your family members who had a case with us, and that's just, sorry. That's just how bad it's gotten, but there's a way to advocate safely, and I hope that this KYR is in an effort to mitigate the number of violations that we've been seeing so that you can protect yourself while you advocate. So it goes without saying that the fight against anti-Muslim bigotry is very much tied to the fight against Zionism. Okay. So if you look at the Islamophobia network globally and domestically, and you take a cross-section of the industries that are involved in perpetuating anti-Muslim narratives, they're one and the same with the networks that perpetuate anti-Palestinian narratives. So if you are a Muslim in this room and you're still kind of on the fence about taking on Palestine as a forefront of your anti-Islamophobia battle in your workplace, in your schools, know that doing anti-Zionist work is part of that anti-Muslim bigotry work. These are billion-dollar industries, and the sheer number should show you that the amount of money they have to pour in to silence and suppress us or to violate our rights is also a reflection of just how much of a force we are to reckon with. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pouring this much money into it. So at CARE, we do We advocate on various fronts in order to confront general ignorance, then the slightly higher level of fear of hate or hatred of Muslims, and then finally the blatant discrimination or civil rights abuses that we see. And we take multi-pronged approaches to this, and I'm sure in your industries and the various industries that you guys are a part of, you'll see that as well. We take on an educational approach to combat the ignorance. We'll take the media and community involvement to combat the fear or the hatred. And obviously we'll take on our government relations and lawsuits when it comes to civil rights violations. And I kind of want to push back a little on the fear of Muslims, because I know people in this room generally know that when you've interacted with someone who has expressed bigotry towards you, it's not because they don't know who you are, it's a deliberate effort. And at this point, we've been in this country since its inception, so there's various ways in which they can, non-Muslims, non-Arabs, and the people around us understand who we are. So at this point, I wouldn't say it's a fear based on ignorance. It's more deliberate, and we're seeing that more and more. So I'm going to skip over the general work that we do because we need to get to the meat of the rights. Okay, so we're seeing a rise in people being contacted by the FBI. It started in Chicago, we saw it in California, and when we saw those reports by other chapters, we knew it was a matter of time before New York and New Jersey were going to see it, and it started, I want to say, around a week and a half ago. But though it started a little bit more slowly on the East Coast, it's skyrocketing. I think at this point it's once every other day that we'll get a community member calling us saying the FBI's at my door. Usually I do a little bit of a skit when it comes to knowing your rights in the context of law enforcement, but I need you to understand one thing. You do not have to speak to law enforcement without an attorney, and that's not something I see as an option. I'm saying it explicitly exercise that right of yours. So if you have the FBI knocking on your door, you can very politely say, I do not wish to speak with you without my attorney. And then if you take down our number and my extension, you have direct line to us. You are not under any obligation to speak with them under time pressure. So don't feel like you need to get an attorney overnight, or they have to respect your right not to engage with them without an attorney present. And I know it feels intimidating. It's very intimidating to have the highest of law enforcement authorities at your door. But when you know your rights, they actually do take a step back, and they're not used to people asserting their rights. So know it and exercise it. Now, when you open your door, I don't advise that you open the door fully, because any inch you give them, they'll take a mile. If you open the door, they'll invite themselves in. Okay, so the golden rule, I guess, is I do not wish to speak with you without an attorney. May I have your business card? I'll have my attorney contact you. Thank you, goodbye. You don't have to wait for them to acknowledge what you said. You can close the door. If it's on the phone, you can hang up. You don't need to respond, because they are trained to get you to speak. And the most benign conversations, you guys, can be manipulated against you. So your life can really turn around overnight with one interaction with the FBI, and you've seen it many times. I'll give you a very kind of common example that's happened in the last couple of weeks, in which a man was contacted by the FBI over an email exchanged with someone in the community looking for marriage. And as he gave her advice, the FBI started to, in his conversations with the imam, started to refer to the imam as an advisor to this person. And so this person who was engaged in illegal behavior immediately implicated the imam, because the imam decided to have the conversation with the FBI. Now, one email exchange giving advice about marriage could be construed in the most unimaginable ways, and you won't know. How many of you here think that it's a crime to lie to the FBI?
Only if you get caught.
Crime to lie to the FBI, yeah.
That's a good point. You will. It's a matter of time you will get caught. It's a federal offense to lie to the FBI. Now, how many of you think that it's a crime for the FBI to lie to It's not. So they can tell you they have all the information on you, and you might be thinking, well, at this point, let me just engage and clear my name. No. They can lie to you, they can state most of the contacts that we see the FBI having with community members is a fishing expedition for information. And when it comes to figures in the community, once you open that door, they will constantly come back to you as a source for information on your community, and you are openly and exposing your community to harm by allowing them to use you as a source. And no one wants to harm each other. So my advice to you, do not talk to the FBI. There's a way in which attorneys can ascertain whether you're a target or a subject. That's the only way that I would ever, as someone's attorney, sit down with the FBI. Otherwise, it's thank you, goodbye. So I'm going to pass around examples of a search warrant, because these are things that you would have to abide by if you come across them. They should be double-sided. If not, then you should get a second copy. Ooh, I think yours is one-sided. But the point of this is to show you this is an example of something you would have to abide by if it's presented to you by law enforcement. One of them is an administrative warrant. That's generally the type of warrant that an agency would use, such as ICE. So if you're a non-citizen, you can be expected, especially during this time, to also be visited by ICE.
Can you say what ICE is?
Sorry, yes, ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's the law enforcement arm of Homeland Security. So it's the police arm of the Homeland Security. If they do present themselves at your home or your place of employment, they again don't have the right to search or ask you questions unless they have that paper. Now, the caveat is an administrative warrant, the standard of credibility and review and enforcement is much lower than that of a judicial warrant. All it needs is the signature of the ICE officer. So the person executing the warrant is the same person that's signing the warrant. It has to have your accurate name on it. Other than that, you have to comply with it. Now, in contrast, there's something called the judicial warrant. That one, there's a higher standard of review for it, and you can take a look at it when an officer does present it to you for a search and seizure. That one has to have a very, very tight scope defined on the paper. That's the time they're executing the warrant has to be there, your name, the address. If they're searching you as a person, that has to be written, and it has to be signed by a judge. If that judge's signature is not there, it's an extra step that law enforcement has to go through in order to execute it, then you can refuse to comply. A lot of times officers take advantage of people not knowing that the judge's signature has to be there and they'll sign it themselves. That's an invalid search warrant and you're not obligated to comply with it. So again, if you see an administrative warrant that's signed by the officer, you have to comply. If you see a judicial warrant from the court with the judge's signature, you have to comply. Yes.
Do they give you a copy of this?
Yes, they do give you a copy, and the last thing, and you just reminded me, the best clients that we get are the ones who are like reporters. Take down everything, document, take the officer's business card. If they don't give you the business card, take their badge number, their name, and the agency they're affiliated with, especially for the local, because there are several precincts when you're in a more metropolitan city. So yeah, so they take down what agency they're visiting you from, take down their name, take down their badge number, and if they have a business card or a phone number. So that way we can advocate for you better when you take down the information.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are the copies on the paper like what they always physically would look like?
No.
No. So you would just, how would you, like looking at it, it would have to say district court on the top to know it's judicial, or how would you easily identify?
It's usually, if it's an FBI agent, it has to be from a federal court, so it would be a district court. Yeah, but the format might differ. I've seen several ones that.
But it would
different.
say
Yeah.
district or federal.
Yeah, it would say federal court, and it would have the scope on top, what they're searching, who they're searching. And on the bottom, we'll have the time that they have to execute it within, and then the judge's signature.
Are electronic copies like invalid? Like, does it have to be?
It doesn't have to be physical, very good question. I have not seen an electronic copy, presented to a person before, but I'm sure it's used. Okay, generally speaking, if you're arrested in New Jersey or you're searched in New Jersey on the street, I advise you to always carry a form of ID that has the most limited amount of information. That could be your library card, so your face and your name. If you're not a citizen in the country, I advise you never ever present your passport if it's not a U.S. passport. That'll give them an opportunity to engage with your immigration status, or call ICE, which the local law enforcement often cooperates with ICE, so please do not give your passport. Okay, so another area in which in the past few weeks we've seen a surge in is people being detained at the airport, people who've never advocated for Palestine but have Muslim sounding names being detained at the airport and being asked the same questions: what movements are you affiliated with? What is your position on Palestine? Do you condemn Hamas? Yeah. So those are areas that the Constitution doesn't allow you the right to an attorney in that space, in that context, before you cross through security. So, of course, Homeland Security will take advantage of that. But generally speaking, if you get your lawyer to try to call through with them and assert their representation of you, they'll be scared enough that they'll either allow you in and conference you in, or they'll let the person go. But unfortunately, the Constitution's application to that specific context is not yet has not yet been litigated. Yeah.
Can you clarify if you meant before or after security?
Before. So once you cross security, you've entered the country, and so your constitutional rights kick in. They detain you before. Yeah.
Or this is entering?
Exactly, when you're coming back.
Do you recommend that everybody has an attorney? Like, I'm sure there are people in here that don't have an attorney, like,
Yeah.
saved in their phone or ready, just in case,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can have a point of contact within your community to always call. Of course, people call us, but I'm one attorney at CARE, so I try to get back as quickly as possible. It helps when you also have a personal contact that can then forward us the work to do to advocate for you after your rights have been violated. But in that moment, of course, it's always helpful to know your rights and also have a point of contact to reach. But generally speaking, when a community member has that language to talk back to authorities with, they lay back and they take advantage of those people who do not. So in that context, if you're detained at the airport, I advise that if you anticipate being detained based on your past experience, that you always change your phone passcode when you're traveling and disable Face ID. So if you refuse to give up your phone for a search, they can easily,
Waive it.
Yeah, they can either waive it if you refuse to put in your passcode, because of course they can't force your fingers into the phone, or they can take photos of you and try with facial recognition technology unlock it.
Do you have a right to tell them you don't want to give
You
them
can,
your phone?
and you should. You should always say, I do not give consent to this search. And then you can later report that to your attorney, and they have ways in which they can challenge it. They often don't, but I've never seen it challenged. The most I've seen it challenged is that if the community member refuses to give up their phone, they'll confiscate it for a day and then have them pick it up. The general hygiene of community members who are prone to detention is updating your passcode, disabling your facial recognition, and taking down your social media accounts. Yeah.
When you are subject to extensive screening, do you become on some sort of list afterwards, or is it just they'll dismiss you with no sort of like warning to anyone else within the system that we flagged down this person with suspicion of compliance?
Can you repeat the second part?
Like, would it still be like registered within their system somewhere that you've been flagged down on suspicions for X, Y, and Z, or no?
There's no way of knowing for sure unless you take that specific case to court. The entire process is opaque. You'll never know why you're detained, and there's no way to confirm it. But the symptom that you're on the watch list is only the symptom of that you're detained every single time you travel. If there are times you travel where you're not detained and you, for example, get the quadruple S on your boarding pass, that might mean you're flagged but not on the watch list. So if you find yourself having difficulty traveling every single time, if you get rejected from a gun license, if you're rejected security clearance at a government building or a background check when you're applying for a job, those are symptoms of being on the watch list, but it's hard to tell.
Is it safe to repeat the questions for the people
Oh,
watching?
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Not now.
okay. Okay. And then obviously it's apparent that you're on the no-fly list when you're trying to print your boarding pass and it's not printing, and then they ultimately deny you boarding when you get to the kiosk. There are ways in which you can be removed off the watch list and ways in which you can be removed off the no-fly list, but you need to bring it to an attorney. We can file a complaint on your behalf or add you to existing litigation to remove you off the watch list. Okay, now this part is also very important. How to safely advocate for Palestine in the workplace. Now, there are two contexts in this subject. There's the public facilities like public schools, public universities, public sidewalks, public employers, like if you're employed by a government agency. That guarantees you the constitutional right for freedom of speech, right? What constitutes freedom of speech? We're talking expressive conduct, we're talking flags, we're talking, stating your political position. That's freedom of speech in that context. But that doesn't mean that goes without limitations. So these various institutions, including your local authorities, will have limitations on how and the manner in which you can express your freedom of speech. So it'll be the spaces within the town that are considered public spaces. So it'll be the streets, the sidewalk, parks. In the public employee context, the best thing to do is to look at your handbook. There's always a handbook that's considered a contractual agreement between you and your employer that guarantees you, it should have a repetition of that freedom to speak, freedom of speech language, but it'll also outline what parameters exist on that right. So for example, if you are a student at the university, you have a student handbook that acts like a employee handbook. It is a contract between the student and the university, and in that handbook is the policy that exists for how and where and when you can express that right. Now, generally speaking, student groups who advocate for Palestine might be, going through procedure in a way other student groups do, which is sometimes they miss procedure. The way in which the school responds can itself be a form of discrimination. So if a student group by the student handbook is required to book a room or to book a space in order to put together a demonstration or a performance or a conference, and they do go about it the wrong way, universities generally turn a blind eye and kind of let the student group continue with their process and point it out later in time or never at all. When it comes to student groups advocating for Palestine, the university tends to go after them very hard. The same way that law enforcement goes after us very hard, it's the same story. That's a form of discrimination. That's a basis for a Title IX claim. Bring that to an attorney. It's a public university and it's subject to the laws of the Constitution. That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act, and it's also a violation of the New Jersey, specifically New Jersey, the New Jersey laws against discrimination. Back to the employment context, you have the right to fairness in hiring. So people come to our office to ask whether if there's evidence of them advocating for Palestine, whether that would expose them to discrimination in the hiring process. Again, it depends on what employee we're talking about. If it's a private company, there's generally more wiggle room for them to discriminate against you. But the general answer is it depends. Political speech is not protected in non-public institutions. So if you're attempting to interview and ultimately be hired by a private company or a private employee, they have the right to discriminate against you based on your public expressions or opinions.
Of politics.
What is that?
Based on your political.
Based on your politics, yeah. But if a case comes to us in which it's a Palestinian expressing the fear of being discriminated against, the strategy is quite different. Now the laws of discrimination against discrimination kick in and they're much stronger.
Because they're Palestinian.
Because they're
And it's
Palestinian.
an identity.
Exactly. So the answer, I don't know why, do you guys hear it's better?
It's better, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's going in my ear. Yeah, so the strategy is different. If you're Palestinian and you're trying to, even a Palestinian exerting their political views on public platforms, or if they're trying to be hired and they're being, there's like, you know, there are ways in which they're being questioned about their politics, the basis for legal action is much stronger because you're protected by the Civil Rights Act, you're protected by the laws against discrimination. If it's a non-Palestinian and they're being roped in based on their political views, then generally speaking, it's political expression. And so the laws against discrimination do not cover that in the employee context.
So just to confirm, you are saying that our political stance on our personal social media can be looked at by our employers, and our employers can go after us for that?
I'm saying generally speaking, if you're not Palestinian and the employer wishes to discriminate against you, terminate you, retaliate against you based on your political views of supporting Palestine, they generally can. I would always recommend that you look at the employer policy of that prospective opportunity because the Constitution for your First Amendment right to freedom of speech doesn't kick in that context, but generally most companies have their own policy. And a lot of companies who are dedicated to inclusion and all these values will have their own way of protecting political expression. So that might be covered by your employer. It's just not all around guaranteed.
Can you clarify in this context the difference between a private company versus a public company? Like, for example, is public only in the sense of it's a government or state-run organization?
Yeah. So public doesn't mean publicly traded. Public means mostly a public university or a state agency or a federal agency.
What about a private university getting public funding?
So that makes your Title IX arguments stronger, but ultimately it's still a private context. Yeah, but you can still, if it's a private school and it's receiving federal funding, or if it's a charter school and it's receiving federal funding, the laws against discrimination still apply. And so it just makes, the fact that it relies on federal funding makes your argument stronger. But we see that private companies, private employers retaliate more viciously than a public employer would.
Also, sorry, one more question.
Yes.
You had mentioned the schools. What about the local boards of education now that they are trying to follow the ADL?
Yeah, let's keep that question in mind. That's an important question because that's actually happening this week across many districts. But I'll get to that. The other strategy that we're kind of still playing around with, because this is new territory for a lot of us, is asking community members to request a religious accommodation before expressing their political views on Palestine. So if you're Muslim, even if you're Christian, actually, I'd be interested to know what scripture is the equivalent of the Quran scripture on the obligation for Muslims to express their views against injustice. There's the hadith that says you have to change it with your mouth, you have to change it with your hands, and then finally you can change it, you can at least reject it internally. But the obligation is the first two. And so that could be requested in the form of a religious accommodation, which is required by law that they accommodate. And there's also the ayah that says those who are silent about injustices are akin to Satan. That's that also makes the argument stronger. We haven't seen employers reject that accommodation. They'll generally use it as an opportunity to explain to the employee the ways in which they can do it without fear of retaliation. So that's the way that maybe non-Palestinians can start to feel safe expressing themselves. But you generally do your due diligence, speak to your employer, speak to your manager, speak to HR, have those frank conversations. And I'm not here to tell you don't advocate for Palestine. I'm showing you how to do it. And it takes creativity, it takes dedication, but have the conversations with PAC, have it with us at CARE, and have it with your employer. Yeah.
So are Zionists using that release?
Probably not.
I don't see it. I don't think they're being retaliated.
How do you, sorry, somebody else. No. How do you suggest going about that, like requesting the accommodation?
We can do it. We can write you a letter requesting, generally speaking, you can request it with your manager. What they generally ask for is, can you provide us with documents that support that sincere religious belief, and then I can just write it up for you. And then the other thing New Jersey is unique about is that you're entitled to a non-hostile work environment. So if you have a colleague that's harassing you or treating you with intimidation or even if you feel it, you should express it to your manager. You have absolutely the right to work in a non-hostile work environment. So we've seen cases in which people who've never expressed political views in the workplace be treated really hostilely, and that's a violation of the law. A simple letter from us can stop that behavior. Okay, so in terms of the students that we're seeing, sorry that the slides are not very encompassing of the Palestine context, but we need to update them. Our students are facing various challenges in schools right now. We have the teachers who are silencing Palestinian students for attempting to exert their existence in the classroom. To give you an example, 2 weeks ago we had a Mount Laurel student. She's Palestinian, 9 years old. She was born under the occupation and in the West Bank, and then moved to Mount Laurel. And the social studies teacher had them line up with two flags, the Palestinian flag, the Israeli flag, project quotes onto the classroom projector, and ask them, if you see this quote and you affiliate it with one side, raise the flag that's associated. So one of the quotations was, we only know violent means to gaining political traction. And so the Jane stood in the middle of that. The teacher looked at her and she said, you can opt out of this activity if you like. Well, the good thing is that we advocated for her. The principal was very, very willing to sit down and have that conversation, was very apologetic about what happened with the teacher. The teacher was reprimanded, but it took the 9-year-old to stand up in front of a classroom of white students and be humiliated so that her existence would be respected in the classroom. So raise your kids to know that they should do this. Like, they should have that principled stance in the classroom because their rights are protected. You just need to, raise it and know and be confident that whoever it is that's intimidating you will be even more intimidated by you, that you know that what your rights are. And don't be afraid to tell the parent or to tell the principal. It changes the atmosphere of the entire school when incidents like that happen and families are unified in their approach with the school. And the school generally yields and respects families in the community to do that. It doesn't ruin your kid's reputation, or it doesn't, there's always like the risk of them being retaliated against by the teacher. The teacher fixes their acts up because everyone's watching her at this point. So in the Mount Laurel school system, they invited the 9-year-old to bring books about her country and put them in various classrooms. I think it's really important to raise your kids to be comfortable advocating for themselves in the same way we would. Do it responsibly, do it respectfully, definitely. And it always makes your case stronger when you're reporting it accurately, when you're doing it within procedure, when you're following procedure, and when you know your rights. Oh, sure. So if you have issues with the school's curriculum, if you have issues with the school's curriculum, if you have issues with the way teachers are presenting facts to your kids, be vigilant, read the curriculum. Most students don't know that what they're being taught is bias or that it's going to impress upon them for the rest of their lives. So you need to be the one to read through that curriculum and of course bring it to your community centers or your organization's attention when that happens. I think that's it. The other thing I would just say in terms of students' rights is in the public school context, schools are really afraid when a lawyer threatens them with a Title IX complaint. It threatens their grants, it threatens their reputation. Those incidents, bring them to us so that we can do that work and fix the way our school system is. And encourage your kids to file that HIV complaint. I feel like our adversaries do it more often than we do, and we're always on the defense. And it's time that our students are also comfortable enough knowing that these are means by which they can feel more comfortable for the years they have in that school system. Teachers can generally speak to you more about this. Hopefully we can do like a student-specific workshop here. But New Jersey has anti-bullying acts. It's called the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act. It's generally referred to as HIB, which is Harassment, Intimidation, and Bullying Law. And the purpose of it is to prevent, investigate, and respond to incidents of intimidation, bullying, again, it's the same risk. Does my child risk being retaliated against? No, because this process is generally anonymous. The only people called to speak with the counselor are people involved. And the same way teachers who are blatant enough to teach racist material, the way in which they fix their act once there's scrutiny involved, generally the bullier is the same. They're usually the cowards of the classroom. So once they're called in, they'll also fix up their act. So I would also encourage your kids to engage in that process, or to at least contact us, and we can help advocate in that context too. I saw some questions. I think it was. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a workplace related question.
Sure.
So if someone files a complaint to HR on the basis of like national identity discrimination, what steps is the HR of that company legally required to take?
They're required to investigate it, and they're supposed to make a neutral determination. We see a lot of human resources procedures working very closely with the employer itself. Sometimes the employer themselves is the one that makes the ultimate determination, which is a very odd process. But if we raise that concern as a legal concern, they change the process for you to accommodate your concerns. So it varies employer to employer, and it varies from school to school. But you should feel free to contact us, and we can help you read through the manual.
I wanted to say if you could talk about the chair incident report and how it's important for everyone to report.
Yeah, totally. So, on Care New Jersey's website, we have an intake form. That's the form that you use to report an incident. That goes directly into my system. So you either get a call back, explaining to you what your issue is and what the next steps need to be before it becomes a legal case, so if it's missing steps. Or if it's ready to move to legal advocacy, you'll get a call from me. It's a direct throughway, and it goes directly into my system. The volume of cases right now is really long, but I would say you would hear back within that same week. Thanks for reminding me. A lot of community members are accidentally filing their intakes with Care National, which is the general care website, and then they wait for a very long time before they hear from us. We eventually get it from the national organization, but it trickles down very slowly. So make sure when you file an incident report, it's through our Care New Jersey website, and you'll get a faster response.
Do you have a slide or any materials that have like your contact?
Yes, right there. This is the number. You can also email info@newjersey.care.com for if you just want to write out your incident. Let me get the website. Sorry. Yeah, care-newjersey.com. That word.
Do you give these at schools? These like Islamic schools? These presentations?
Yeah. And this is kind of what we call like our emergency KYRs. There's a lot of material that goes into this presentation, so that every context is covered. Feel free to invite us for a very specific rights workshop, and I'll go into the law of each context. So if you're mistreated at work, if your kid's bullied at school, if you have issues with the school board, if you're detained at the airport, if you're contacted by the FBI, if your bank account was closed, if you're targeted in the public or in a place of public accommodations like a grocery store or a gym, I think gyms are a big deal right now too. Definitely contact us. We're trying to consolidate advocacy around each specific facility. So if there's 7 cases arising from like Lucille Roberts in Clifton, then the lawsuit is 1, and it makes the work go faster when we have one cause of action. Yeah.
You mentioned for students, right? Filing like an HIV complaint. How does one do that?
So the first thing is there's usually an HIV officer stationed in the school, if I'm not mistaken, right?
There's a counselor, it's.
A counselor, specialist.
One of the specialists, it's usually a specialist within the framework of a counselor, so you reach out to the counselor and you say like you wanna initiate an HIV in the school, and then they give you the next steps. So definitely have your counselor's information on hand.
Yeah, so there's the general counselor of the school, and there's usually 1 to 2 special counselors that are tasked with investigating HIV complaints. They're trained in a very specific way. So generally it goes to them. They call the person who is a victim of the hate to give them a report. They call the person perpetuating to give them the report. They conduct, usually it's a week-long investigation, and then if it's determined that there was an intimidation, harassment, or bullying incident, then it goes into a hearing. It's either in front of the school board or in front of the principal.
If the ABS specialists themselves is Islamophobic, then what?
It's similar to the HR issue.
Good question.
Contact us and we make that a problem. Then they'll change the procedure. Or they'll call a specialist from a nearby school.
Good question.
Yeah, I have a question. For non-Muslims that are being targeted for pro-Palestinian advocacy in public institutions, can they contact CARE or should they contact a different organization like ACLU or something?
Okay, so the question is, sorry,
Yeah.
the question is if it's a non-Muslim who's subject to harassment or retaliation, but for their Palestine advocacy, but they're non-Muslim or non-Arab, they can definitely contact CARE. Okay. A lot of our community, we still consider you community. If you're advocating for Palestine, feel free to come to us. Yeah.
Do you want to repeat the school board question?
Oh, that, so I saw on one of our WhatsApp groups that recently the Bridgewater Board of Education had sent out a letter that was from ADL, the Anti-Defamation League,
Yeah.
talking about, I mean, not being too articulate, but basically students on campus can protest, cannot protest for Palestine. They cannot be pro-Palestinian, they can be pro-Israeli. So they sent out this message, and we have a Muslim brother on the school board in Bridgewater, and he was able to speak up, and so they completely changed their stance.
So a lot of our schools are using the ADL as their source for like anti-hate campaigns in their schools. We just don't know it. Bridgewater just happened, and we're at least at CARE we're using that as a playbook now. We're kind of changing the language so it doesn't bite us in the future. The kind of playbook that Bridgewater used was challenging the idea of bringing a political or religiously affiliated organization to a public school. That might hurt us in the future because, you know, who better to educate on anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry than the impacted community themselves, so we don't want to use that language. But there are other ways to go about it that are just as successful. It has to be at the forefront of the community's agenda. So look into your school district, see what your kids are signing. The kids are being given pledges that are written and published by the ADL, and they sign it. And that is considered a classroom contract with the teacher. So if they kind of violate that pledge, disciplinary action is taken against them. It's usually the Arab students, which is no surprise, or the Muslim students. And parents don't know that. It's an issue that we need to take up. There's a Wayne Board of Education meeting happening today, in which community members are raising it as an issue. Little did we know that's the source that they've been using for years. We actually have a gold star over in Wayne for using the ADL so much, and we take grants from them as well. So it's definitely, I mean, Bridgewater is a perfect example. It happened this week. It's not an insurmountable task that just takes strategy. It takes us being on the same page, and we should be on the same page. We should reject the ADL from our schools.
So is that, sorry, I don't know if anyone else has a question, but to follow up with what you just said, is there something we can proactively do with our local boards? Like,
Yes.
I live in a town which is very pro-Israeli, so is there something we can do to sit down with the board?
With your school board?
Yeah.
Yeah, so today, for example, the agenda item doesn't include the ADL. You can go and there's a public comment portion of the meeting, raise it. There's enough people in the room that make it an issue, and they have to respect the community that they're serving. Yeah.
I think just on that note too, I think as a community, we have to be more involved in our Board of Education, in our city council, and beyond just when Palestine or different, or our community, our Muslim community comes up, our Arab community, I think we need to be like more proactive constantly. So it's not a bad habit every time you have a board meeting, maybe once every couple of months, attend it, build that relationship with your Board of Education members. And I think as a community in general, we have to get better at that.
Definitely. You'll learn the landscape more the more you attend, so you'll know what strategies work the more that you're exposed to that environment. So the only reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason Bridgewater was so successful is because you do have an active community in the Board of Education. People called the other Muslim Board of Education members and asked them what tactic would work best, and it worked in a day. So benign, yeah.
So can you explain that to everyone?
Sure, yeah.
They know what to look for and what to tell their.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you read the pledge, it's very positive language. It actually feels weird to stand up and be like, I'm against this pledge. It says no hate in the classroom, don't, intimidate your classmates, very good stuff. Yeah. But look at the ADL's history. They are the organization that brings bigotry and hate into every space. So bring that context and that history to your Board of Education. They most likely don't know it, or they only know one side. And the ADL has been here for years. They are at the forefront of the civil rights conversation. But there's a lot of baggage with ADL. They have a history
history with the Black community, they have a history with the LGBTQ community, they have a history with the Arab community, the Muslim community, you name it, and there's baggage. And if you consolidate that context and present it in a way in which your Board of Education can do nothing but reject them from these spaces, then it'll be a worthwhile effort. But it's the Anti-Defamation League. They're an explicitly Zionist organization, but they're very right-winged, so if you look into the history, they've probably harmed every community out there.
Can I just make a comment? It's not really a question.
Yeah.
I just want to really encourage people. Like, I feel like our community is going through so much right now, like never before, and everybody's doing a lot of really good work, and we can all learn from each other. Like in the case of Bridgewater, if you know that there's somebody in another town going through them, connect them to the people at Bridgewater who already successfully tackled the issue. If you don't know who to speak to, reach out to, PAC or CARE, anybody, and they can probably connect you to somebody else who can help you. It's, it can feel like really intimidating if you've never been to a Board of Education meeting before, but chances are, somebody else that has and somebody that can help you. So I think it's like really important that we all lean into each other right now and help each other strategize.
The last 3 weeks have been a testament on how quickly we can organize.
Yeah.
And, the ADL issue in Wayne, for example, the board meeting was tonight. The issue was only brought to our attention yesterday when a Palestinian family learned from their child that the pledge was reintroduced to them for disciplinary reasons. So it wasn't to sign, it was in reaction to something that the child did in the classroom. And so the community quickly got into a Zoom call and realized Bridgewater had just done it. And it's really important, like Lou said, to be connected and to act in the moment and to refer each other to leaders in the community who might know the answers.
What does that mean, that a minor signs a pledge or something? You're saying that it has legal ramifications? I don't really understand.
No, it's called, the school calls it a student contract. And it's intimidating language, really, and it's because there's repercussions to it. It's not enforceable in court, obviously, you have 9-year-olds signing it, but it's enforceable in terms of it triggers a disciplinary process. So if you violate the pledge, there's a reaction, and it's done by authorities. So
they do have a student signature, and they have a parent signature on it too.
They do? I didn't see that. Okay.
Yes, they have both.
Yeah, okay. Because most of the parents we've spoken to this week about this pledge had no idea that this pledge existed.
That's how you sign on back to school night. When you go to back to school night, you sign it.
They slide it in.
Yeah. So they have both.
Yeah.
I know I'm asking and talking a lot. I have another question. He said I'm taking up a lot. In that, just I guess I don't have a child in school, but others might benefit from this question. Like, if your child does receive one of these pledges, what do you advise as like the actual steps? That like, should the parent just go to the school immediately, or what is the?
That's a good question. So the question
Like, if you come across it, what should you do?
Yeah, if you're a parent whose child was given this pledge by the teacher, what can you do as a parent? Well, I can't tell you like one specific answer. I can tell you what I've seen. I've seen the Palestinian students' parents. I'm saying Palestinian because that's the only case that came directly to me. Explain to the teacher how much she wants to sign a pledge like this, and how much she wants her kid to adopt those values. But there's so much subtext to the fact that it's attached to the ADL as a Palestinian family, and she doesn't want to sign it. And so, decided to join today's meeting at the board, which happens periodically, so it's not like you're waiting too much to bring it up to the board's attention, but she made it an important issue to bring up. And so she's attending today's meeting to be like, my Palestinian kid should not have to sign something like this. Yeah.
Are there any legal implications for equating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? Is there like a gray area? Like how do the authorities,
Can you repeat the first part of your question?
Yeah, the ADL I know is pushing for like equating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Is there any way to like fight against that, or is that, I know Biden is pushing that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the question is there a way to challenge right now the conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? There's a a push, I think it's run by the ABL actually, to make criminal criticism of Israel and for institutions to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance definition of what anti-Semitism is, which includes criticism of Israel. Right now in New Jersey, we're lucky, and this is why attending those boards of education meetings right now is really critical, because we don't have that signed in legislation yet. We have, as New Jersey, we have not adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to be that it include criticism of Israel. Otherwise, in states where they have adopted it, it's considered a violation. It's now in criminal code. So this is the time to keep challenging that conflation, and it happens in your communities at that level, at Board of Education meetings, and eventually once it's proposed as legislation, open for public comment. Yeah.
I was also gonna just say on this, I think it's important for our community to be vigilant, because like they are actively trying to pass these definitions, and they do it in sometimes in ways that you don't even realize. So like in Clifton, we had an issue, and we were able to realize it, but it was within like a 1-day notice that we noticed and we were able to mobilize. So a lot of this is just kind of being vigilant about these different, bills that they pass, and just and then of course, if you notice that's happening in your city, contact PAC, contact CARE. We're happy to help put together like mobilize and guide on how to handle that the best way.
Okay, what was the organization that you said, Holocaust Day of Remembrance? Is that
Oh, the International Holocaust Remembrance. I think the last word is ACT. Alliance. Sorry.
IHR.
Yeah, IHRA. I think New York has already adopted it in our backyard, so it's only a matter of time if we don't challenge it here. Yeah.
Okay, so I work at a private institution at a private school that's not publicly funded or anything. And I was wondering, I know we touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but like reiterate it. Like say for example, like I wanted to wear my kufiyah. Like if anyone was to discriminate against me, like my right to free speech, right to expression, all that is not protected underneath the private.
Are you Palestinian?
Yes.
Okay. So if your employer is private, protection for political speech is almost non-existent. So your constitutional right to free speech does not apply in the private context.
Okay.
If you are Palestinian and you're wearing your keffiyeh or your icon on Google Meets is the Palestinian flag, then the laws against discrimination, your civil rights protections kick in. And so you can raise any complaint, and it's probably the strongest argument you can make.
So like something like a kufiyah, like wearing this, or like a pin on my jacket.
Is related to your national origin.
So that's protected.
Yeah.
Interesting. Taking notes. Thank you.
Off that point, what if it's imagery that's tied to a political statement? For example, it's not just a Palestinian flag, it says Free Palestine as well. Does that change the equation at all?
So that's definitely, if it's generally speaking, considered political expression, so it's still political speech. But if you preemptively have that conversation with human resources or your manager, and I forgot to mention this, any conversation you have has to be in writing. So if you're in a meeting and it's a conversation, make sure you ask the person, your employer, or whoever you're speaking to, record the conversation, because it's a one-party consent state, or that they memorialize it in an email after your meeting is over, so it's on the record. But have that conversation preemptively. I am a Palestinian employee. I support my country. What are the implications I'm up against if I put something like that up? Will I be retaliated against? Give them the most uncomfortable line of questioning so that you can get the most, the worst answer, so that we know how to creatively argue in response. Then before you're retaliated against, we can take that conversation, make the argument that this is tied to your national origin, and that any expressions of hostility or any acts of retaliation, they're on notice about. So if they retaliate against you after that conversation and after that notice, then it's a case for retaliation.
a hoodie with the Palestinian map on it, and then someone treated me different because of that. Would I take that to the school, or would I take that to the police?
So if you're in the school, I would definitely tell you to ask your teacher where to report it to. Say, this happened to me. I want to bring it to the school's attention. And I'm telling you, but I also want to know who is my HIV counselor. I want to talk to the counselor.
What if it was the teacher?
The teacher.
You can still report a teacher. Yes. But definitely tell us if that happened to you.
We're reporting everyone around.
Yes.
So if it's coming from the teacher, report it like where to the principal?
You can still report it to the HIV counselor. Yeah. It's a teacher.
I want to say two things. One, on that note, if your child goes to public school or any school, make sure you read their uniform policy because that also helps. We were speaking to someone at one point and they were giving advice like maybe they don't let you wear it, but you can like tie it on your book bag or something like that. So you can find workarounds to some of this stuff. The second thing is in terms of the employer, sometimes you can ask them to send it in writing, or if you're recording it. Well, I would also advise, and I correct if this is right or wrong, I would also say like if they don't do that after the meeting, send them an email saying, hey, this is just a summary of what we talked about.
Yeah. If you object to the way that I summarized it, please respond.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But everything should be in writing.
Just on the topic of recording, it's in New Jersey, it's allowed if you're.
Yes, so in New Jersey, which is not the same for other states, we're a one-party consent state, meaning you can start, I would say do it in a very subtle manner, but you can press record on any conversation you're having without the consent of the other party, and it's legal.
And that's legal.
It's legal.
Can I say also with schools, I know that there are incidents where a teacher might say something and the school might support, but typically, I think the like more possible scenario, administration will not support the teacher, it's the opposite. As soon as a parent says something and speaks up, they stand by the parents, it's just like fear, not even for anything. And if it does go to, if you need to, go with, if it doesn't get you anywhere with the principal, go to the superintendent, they're obligated to speak to you and hear from you.
If they meet with you.
If they
If you want the multiplier effect, organize parents. If you want the multiplier effect to have it recognized, text the other parents that you know in your child's classroom. It really, so in the Mount Laurel case, it really did change the conversation immediately. Like they went from, we'll have the principal apologize to the student to, we're changing the curriculum, we took the entire thing out, supplement us with what you want to be in the curriculum, and we'll have books on Palestine on the shelves. So that was because the parents banded together.
Strength in numbers.
Yeah, strength in numbers, definitely.
So what happens if the superintendent refuses to meet with you?
Oh, yeah, that's a random.
I've never had Yeah, call me. Yeah, definitely.
But you should, so I think to clarify the question, so everyone has the right to meet with the superintendent.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless they don't make time for you, that's the way of getting out of the conversation.
What if they scheduled the meeting and then canceled it?
That's what I'm saying, like, they can try to get out of it in a technical way, but they can't say, I refuse to meet with you.
They can reschedule.
They can,
Keep rescheduling.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. So for teachers, particularly like history teachers, I know myself, I know a lot of other teachers in school districts have been told not to teach about the current events happening in Gaza. And we're not told that about any other current event. Like they didn't tell us that with Ukraine, we were allowed to teach it and all that. So how can we advocate and say like, why are you telling us only this event we can't talk about, but any other current event we can?
Yeah, that's a great question. You said this is a private school?
Public school.
It's a
like,
public
yeah,
school?
yeah.
That's a straight Title IX complaint. That's a discrimination and the application of policy. It's a discrimination of viewpoint. Definitely bring it up with an attorney. That's a Title IX.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, if you're a teacher who has been given the green light to teach current events, but it stopped at Palestine, how do you bring it up as an issue? I would say go through the steps first, like definitely bring it up to human resources, tell them you know what you're allowed to do under the law. Tell them you also recognize what they're not doing under the law, which is discriminating on viewpoint and the way they're enforcing school policy. So have that whole paper trail, and then take it up with if they don't respond to that, then obviously there's a Title IX complaint there. Yeah.
Are there any issues with like criticizing American foreign policy and American support for Israel, or general American policy? Are those pressures usually worse, or compared to criticizing Israel, let's say?
I don't know of any case that I've ever worked on that was related to criticizing American government. I think we go harder for.
Un-American is not something that shows up.
Sorry, I don't know.
I'm saying like if an employer would fire somebody for being un-American or something.
So I've never seen that. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any issue. Well, I've seen issues.
I said I think if you're criticizing the American government, you're being American.
Yeah.
That's part of the
I've seen issues with like colleagues at work telling people to go back to their country if they're criticizing the U.S. military, for example. But yeah, that's harassment.
You can criticize anyone, there is free speech, did you get the punishment?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about what you said with, in a private, workplace, if you're not Muslim or Muslim and the, protections are a little less. Have you seen anything in terms of kind of using, I'm a physician at one of the hospitals that have sent like a pro-Israel email with no mention of Palestine, so Palestinians are afraid to speak up, but then it's hard through a private hospital system. So have you seen like a spin that doctors have taken, like saying like the Hippocratic Oath kind of protects them under this, especially with like the Al-Shifa hospital being targeted? If you haven't seen it, or do you think that this could be fun if like the non-Palestinian and non-Muslims within the workplace are retaliated?
Actually, I've seen the opposite. I've seen physicians in the last 4 weeks being the victims of workplace retaliation and termination more than any other industry right now. And for the most part, it's been with that spin that you're referencing, with the human rights, the humanitarian crisis angle, the reminder to their fellow physicians that they're bound by the Hippocratic Oath, and they've still been terminated. So I don't know that works. Yeah. Right, yes.
Could it in some cases, specifically with discussion of discrimination as related to retaliation, like let's say if you were to go and file a discrimination claim, and then for whatever reason, as you guys were discussing, they terminate you, and then you devise it as a retaliation claim, wouldn't that proximity also kind of help in like improving that discrimination claim at the same time? Like wouldn't that in a way like turn it towards your favor? Because it's seen as directly related almost to like your firing. The fact that you went and filed.
Yeah, sure. Arguments for the injury that you experienced are usually tied to both. But the problem is that you can only bring those legal claims after you've experienced the termination. So if you put your employer on notice that I'm taking such and such steps because it is part of my identity, and any kind of indication that my colleagues or managers retaliate against me for that will be considered retaliation, then you kind of preempt being terminated because they're on notice. But usually when we're making discrimination complaints, there's retaliation involved in the same arguments. Noor, do you want to talk about the public health, health care workers
Oh, sure. Yeah. For any healthcare workers that are present, there's an event.
I just wanted to say on Saturday, I don't know what time it is, Saturday at 12 here, there's an event being organized by Healthcare Workers for Palestine. They'll be holding a press conference showing their solidarity with the healthcare workers in Palestine amidst everything going on. So people are encouraged, if they're healthcare professionals, to show up wearing their scrubs or white coat. And if there are any concerns about concealing your identity for fear of retaliation participation, you're welcome to show up wearing a mask or whatever you feel will comfortably, or a poster, yeah. But they're not asking for statements. To my understanding, they're not having public statements. They'll just be reading one statement, but people can show up in support. So I don't think I missed anything.
I had healthcare workers ask about how they can safely participate in this without fear of retaliation. I've advised them to speak to their human resources representative and their manager in writing and have it confirmed in writing that so long as they're representing themselves in their individual capacity and not representing the hospital or a professional capacity, that they will not be retaliated against. And so long as that's confirmed in writing, you should feel comfortable coming.
Just to clarify, the counselor, I just found the personal contact, it's an anti-bullying specialist. So you can ask for the anti-bullying specialist.
I just wanted to give a special shout out to Aya, who has been amazing. She's been our go-to lawyer for everything, and I'm telling you, like, literally everything. So many different people call us that back. And I know she gets a lot of calls, obviously, from Karen, from a lot of different areas, and she's been instrumental. I want to give a specific shout out to the way there was an NYU doctor who lost his job, and Aya helped him get it back. So, Aya is amazing, and has been working around the clock, and we need more Aya. And I think just the end thing, just to end with this whole conversation, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to Aya. I think it's just really important, and I always say this, I think after 9/11, we were living in a lot of fear, especially our community, where we felt like it's better not to talk. And I think there's a lot of generational trauma where everything is addy, like everything's okay. And we want to challenge both of those narratives. So we don't want to live in fear anymore, and not everything is addy, not everything is okay. So we need to learn to speak up. Even something you may think is small or you may think is like questionable, you have a listening ear here at PAC, you have a listening ear at CARE. Always feel free to call us and say, hey, like this happened, what do you think? And we're happy to help you. I always say at this point, it's better to over-complain than under-complain, because if you speak up, others will have the courage to speak up too. And the last thing I want to say is make sure you continue to build good relationships with your Board of Education, your city council, because it's really important to continue building those relationships, because we've been seeing some cases like in Clifton who've been very helpful because we have those strong relationships with them that we're able to sometimes address it directly. And the last thing is teach your kids to speak up. As young as once they start going to school, they need to have an open relationship with you where they're sharing what's happening at school so that you can advocate for them. Because I want to say almost all the cases that are happening at school are happening by the kids speaking up about it. So if they don't speak up about it, we don't know what's happening. And thank you everyone, and stay safe. Let's give another round of applause for Aya.